Over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Beckwith, and I'm 24. I live just outside of London, and I've been fishing for over about 20 years now. Big thank you to Derek for having me on. I think it's my second time tying for you guys, so thank you for having me back. Uh, I'll be honest, I wasn't really sure what I was going to tie today. I've been umming and ahhing with different ideas, but I thought I'm going fishing on Saturday on a small still water. So I'd walk you through my thought process on the flies I'm going to use. So everything I'm going to show you today are tried and tested patterns that I will be using this weekend. If you have any questions, just shout during the tying session, after the tying session, whatever you'd like to do. Please jump in, feel free. If you have any questions or points on materials, where I get them from, what I use, why I use what I use, please again shout any questions. I'll do my best to explain it. If anything's not clear, again, just chuck in a question and I'll answer it for you. So I'm going to go in order from really nasty to quite nice, which is tends to be my approach when I come to a small still water in the winter. So start with the big garish nasty stuff, see if I can pick up a couple of easier fish. And then as the day goes on, the fish get a lot of pressure. They see a lot of nasty flies. They tend to focus on the more natural patterns. So I'm going to tie in the order of my thought of my fishing process. So the hook and the vise is a size 8 wet fly hook. 99% of my fishing is now done on barbless. I don't know what your guys' thoughts on that is, but I tend to fish catch and release more than catch and kill, so I prefer them. Obviously, barred hooks absolutely fine, but for the purpose of the videos, this is going to be all on barbless. The thread is UTC 70 in orange. Doesn't matter particularly on this pattern what thread you use, as long as it's a flat thread. So things like UTC, Vivus, anything like that, and that'll become clear shortly. So just going to start the thread. Has the focus improved for you there, Derek?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Perfect. So small base of thread and then double up. And then I'm just going to come in with some yellow bead chain eyes in a 3.2 mil. And all I'm going to do is catch them in and just do a figure of eight, like so. And then one thing, when they're secured, you can then do 4 or 5 wraps each way. And then what I like to do with bead chain is I like to do underneath the bead but above the hook. Now, what that does is where you've wrapped in a figure of eight motion, if you can see it more clearly there, what will happen is you'll get a bridge of thread above, but that bridge is very liable to slip because there's nothing locking it down. So by going underneath the bead chain in between the hook, you're tightening those turns, almost constricting the turns around the bead chain, and then making it even more even tighter and even more secure, like so. And you see, not moving at all. If I didn't do those locking turns, what you'd find is the beads be liable to slip around and twist and turn, which obviously you don't want.
Mm.
Now, this is where it gets a little bit garish. Really nice, bright, dark pink marabou for the tail. So I'm just going to select a piece, just strip it off. And then what I like to do is just snip off the waist there. Now, for the first turns, I like to pull all the fluff off, like so. So you've got nice, clean, neat ends. And what that does is it makes the connection point nice and clean for you. Okay. And then you tie that in. You see how that's really nice and smooth. And again, you'll see why in a second why it's really important. So unspin your thread so it's nice and flat. And then we're going to catch this in touching turns all the way down to around about where a barb would be. So if you're using a barbed hook, it's much easier. If you're not, like I'm not using, around about the barb would be about a third of the way down the point of the hook. And I'm going to come one turn. So I suppose I've jumped ahead a little bit there. Basically, with marabou, it's as you know, when you catch fish or sometimes in casting, the thread tends to wrap around the hook and gets in your way. You can see where it's sitting slightly lower here. Okay. What I like to do is I like to come over and just do one turn underneath the marabou. pull it at a 180 degrees, like so, and up like this. And you see it's all automatically cocked up a little bit. So it's going to sit higher, just like so. And what that means is less liable to come round and twist. And again, it sits nice and neatly on top of the hook, like so. So just a little bit of fluff there. And then tail-wise, probably 1.5 body lengths. So round about there is ample. Okay, this might be a garish fly, it's not necessarily a big fly. Now the body, it's edge-brite. I don't know if any of you have ever used edge-brite. I'll grab it out of the pack so it's clearer for you. If any of you have grandkids, you'll know that pencil cases come in this sort of material. And the bright edge, as you can see, where he gets the name from, edge-brite. Really, really nice stuff. But when it comes in a pack, it's kind of a bit of a strange tool. You don't really know what to do with it. Something you can do is create a really nice body with it. Now, all I've done is I cut a strip about 1 centimetre, maybe just over 1 centimetre, and I've chopped lots of little notches and nodules into it. And I got about 2, maybe 3 mil of base still. Okay, now it doesn't have to be incredibly accurate, but there or thereabouts is absolutely fine. And then I've cut everything off, so I've got a nice clean tie-in point. So I'm going to catch that in, and notice that the spikes are facing upwards, and that'll become clear in a second. So again, catch that in. I'm going to do touching turns again. Now, the reason I've got this flat thread, one, UTC is quite strong, and two, because it's flat, it makes tying a clean, neat underbody really, really easily. So the thread in this case being orange is actually going to be visible through this body, which is why it's very important that it's a nice, clean, touching turns and smooth. Now, the reason that you cut the little nodules into the body is because it's going to create an effect like this. So you can see it's got almost like a porcupine, if you like, kind of style body. So you're going to bring that up in open turns. You come up to just behind the bead. You're going to catch it in like so. 2 turns over, pull it tight. It's quite a malleable material. So if you do tight thread turns, you can actually almost cut the material. You don't obviously want to do that, but what it does mean is you can create a nice, neat tie-off point and then come in and snip off your waist piece, like so. As you can see there, you've got a really funky, almost 3D-like body with lots of different edges. But the nice thing with this is, yes, it's quite bright and garish, but actually the bright edges only show in certain lights. So it's not like a Fritz body, which is just all big, bulky and bright and flashy. This one, it relies on catching the light. So actually it's obviously not for fish that have seen a lot of flies, but actually providing something slightly different, I found tends to outfish your standard Fritz or straggle bodies. Granted, it doesn't have the same amount of movement, but I think sometimes it's a bit of a toss-up, and I've had a lot of success on this one in particular. It's actually had my biggest small stillwater brown on this fly, which, about 9 pounds. So for me, it's nice and big, but obviously some of you guys may have caught doubles and plus. But wing, again, back to the pink. So we can get a little bit more this time, probably 1.5 times the amount as a tail. You don't want it to be too bulky, because obviously you've got no movement in the body. So all of your movement's going to come from that wing and the tail. So a little bit more than the tail, probably a little bit of bulk, but not too much that it restricts the movement. And again, pulling all the fluff out of that marabou, create that nice, neat tie-off point. It's going to catch that in like so. And then because it's right behind the bead, we're actually going to do figure of 8 turns between the beads tied in. So you're going to tie it off and then figure of 8 turns in between the bead. Again, it's going to first secure the bead, but it's also going to lock that marabou in nicely. Like so. And then just It's the length of the tail there. As you can see, by doing that, you've got a really nice, neat head area. You can add dubbing to this if you want to. I don't particularly worry about that. The original, so this is based on a fly called an Incredible Cat, and that was this exact fly but in white. It has sort of pearl dubbing. There's a black version as well that works with the black peacock dubbing. I don't think it makes a blind bit of difference, especially when you've got this big garish pattern. You can do what you want to it, really. You can change the color of the body of the edge-brite. You can change the color of the marabou, the eyes. World's your oyster, really. But it's just a really nice, and as you can see, really simple pattern that you can tie up in a couple of different variants, and it does take a lot of fish and big fish as well. I think the beauty of this is also it's just slightly different. As I say, your general rule of thumb on small waters is going to be your frits and your straggle type lures, whereas this one just provides something ever so slightly different for you. And just, as I say, works really well. So that's the first one. Second is an arse'd bloodworm. I think most of you will be aware of what those are. I think they're fantastic. I really like them. I've caught a lot of fish on them. This is going to be more of a Blue Peter style tie because they're a little bit fiddly. So I'm going to show you how I prepare it, and then I'm going to show you pretty much the finished article because the actual process of putting the beads on the hook is a bit of a pain. What you're going to need is a bobbin threader. This one is a bit mangled. This is my arse'd bloodworm bobbin threader because you're going to put the beads on this. And obviously the beads have very small holes and it does tend to wreck them. So just a cheap bobbin thread is perfect for this. And all you're going to do is just slot your beads on through the slots. These are just Gutman seed beads from the local haberdashery or craft shop. Cheap as chips. You get thousands for about £3. I tend to go on a size 10 with about 5 beads. That's usually ample. Sometimes you can, go away with 4. Sometimes you can get away with 6. It really just depends on the beads because they're all slightly different sizes by, points of a millimeter. But it's really the fish obviously aren't going to check. So these are green, and then I've got some olive flexifloss, which I prepared earlier. And what I've done is I've just got an equal length, folded it in half and cut it in 2. And what you're going to do is you're going to slot those in. And then, as you'll be aware, at the end of every bobbin threader, where it crosses over, I don't know if this is going to pick up on the camera, it gets very tight at the end. And it's almost a little sort of self-contained loop at the end. And what we want to do is we want to pull the flexi into that, and you can see it locks in pretty tight. Okay. And then you're just going to push the beads, pull them through, like so. And they're going to go on like so. One thing I would say is get good quality flexifloss. Some of the this is quite thick. It's from a guy called Bill McIlroy on Facebook. He does some of the best flexi I've ever used. Sometimes the thinner stuff has a tendency to snap. So thicker stuff like this works really, really well. Now, what you would do from here is you'd get your hook and then you basically hook bead by bead, put it around, bead, put it around. I'm not going to bore you by doing that because it's a bit of a faff. So here's one I prepared earlier. So as you can see, 2, 4 now, equal length strips on the hook. This one has 6 beads on this one. As I say, some beads are bigger than others. You can play around with it. Again, that same orange thread. Now, this, as you can see, is pulling that pretty hard and it's fairly solid. But to be really safe with it and to make sure your flies obviously last because they'll take a lot of fish, it's always best to tie it off at the back. So I quite like olive and orange. It's quite a good color combination. It's a little trigger point for the fish as well. That's all you're going to do is come in like so. Now, as you're aware, when you're tying flies, when you tie thread onto a hook, obviously you're going to go down the hook and you're going to catch in your tag. In this case, you've got about a mil, maximum 2 mil of space to catch in that thread, and it's not going to catch in properly. So if I let go of this tag end, it's going to loosen up and fall off. So what I'm going to do is take the tag end, pull it towards the eye of the hook, and cross over that thread, and again, and cross over, and again. And what that means is that tag is now locked in place. Now, if I didn't do that, there's a very, very good chance that I wouldn't actually be catching it in properly, and eventually it would just undo itself. So by crossing it, you're locking it in a little bit more securely. And then now that's locked in and happy, you don't need a huge amount of thread, just a little amount like so, just to tie it off and give you a little orange butt, like so. And then when you're happy with that, I'm going to come in with a little bit of super glue just to lock it off. There you go. Now, the next thing you're going to do is going to get another piece that's the same length as the other legs. So this case I've got 6 beads, so it's easy to find the middle. If you don't have 6 beads, 5 beads, whatever, vaguely the middle, either 2 back or 3 back, it doesn't really matter. The fish aren't going to sit by your flying count. Lift it up across and just do a normal knot. And then pull it really tight. And then what you want to do is when you pulled it nice and tight, wiggle it down. Okay, so it's pulling down, and that will lock that in place in the middle there. And that's your middle legs. And again, another little drop of super glue just to lock that one in place. This fly probably is more arts and crafts than fly tying, but catches an unbelievable amount of fish. It represents absolutely nothing, but fish go nuts for it. I generally fish this on a slow or fast class, very, very quick, short strips, and the legs like an octopus. They just pulse. I tend to, when I'm about, I don't know, 2 rod lengths away from the bank, just stop everything, wait for 10 seconds or so, and then start again. You tend to find that hang or that pause, and the fly starts to drop very, very slowly. Fish just inhale it. Really good pattern, super simple. Tie in different colors, so I do them in olive, I do them in red, pink, amber. You can play around, there's all sorts of different variations, but this one is a particular favorite. And it's definitely going to go on the cast on Saturday. Right, next one. You'll probably noticed, I mean, whoever was at my last talk, my flies are very, very simple. I tend to avoid complicated flies. I think I did grading flies last time, and max 3, 4, maybe at a push 5 materials. I don't fish as much as I'd like to, so if I'm going to go fishing, I want to basically knock up flies really, really quickly and not be upset if they get wrecked. I also have a very busy job, so I don't have a huge amount of time to tie flies. I was talking to Derek about this before you all came on. I travel a lot with work, so sitting down to tie a few flies is a luxury, so I want to do it really quickly and really easily. So the next fly, love or hate it, is a blob. I love them. I think they're great. I will say this last year, I've really refined how I tie them and how I fish them. Gone are the days these fish big, horrible, size 10, size 8, nasty, massive, bright blobs. Scrapped all of them. I've actually found that more recent times, smaller, neater, tidier blobs catch a lot more fish, spook a lot less fish, and generally I feel like a nicer way to fish them. So hook and device in this case is a size 10 short shank. So what that means is the shank length of a 12 and the gape of a 10. So sort of a short shank special, if you like. And that same orange thread again. So this fly was probably my best this year on reservoirs. So I fish rivers, lakes, reservoirs, whatever I can really get access to. I found that when I was fishing with guys who were fishing what I'd call normal size blobs, so either a size 10 wet hook or size 8 short shank, I was out fishing them probably 5 or 6 fish to one with these much, much smaller, tidier blobs and fabs. I think they're just more bite-sized, they're less spooky, there's less colour, and fish tend to be more confident when they eat them. And that's something I am moving more towards on the smaller waters as well. So this is a pattern I'd probably fish in tandem with some small nymphs or small cormorants, because obviously, unlike your big garish pink job, which is going to probably take a few fish early on and then they sort of spook away from this later, little flies like this, although they're bright, they're small enough to not spook too many fish. So 5mm white booby cord, and I'm just going to line it up to the bend of the hook, and then whatever excess I've got, I'm just going to come and snip that off there. I'm just going to catch that in on the top. So my general rule of thumb with fabs, if I'm on a size 8 short shank, so the slightly bigger size than this, I will use half of a 7mm. But for size 10s, I use a whole 5mm. And then size 12 short shank, which are really, really small, I use a whole 3.5mm. You can do whatever way around you like. Some people like a whole 5mm in an 8 or a whole 7mm, or it really is up to you in terms of what you do. But for me, this is just what works and what I quite like to do. So the back end is just standard yellow sweet corn, sunburst yellow, whatever you want to call it. I've probably got pretty much every fritz and every shade. I've got about probably 10 different yellows and 11 or 12 oranges and pinks and corals. And yeah, you could probably tie millions of different combinations of blobs just with the same yellows. I don't think it matters hugely. This is just the yellow I've got left. Yellow is yellow, to be fair. I think certainly on its day, maybe a specific fritz or shade is picking out more fish, but I don't think. I think sometimes we give fish too much credit when we go really, really shade specific. So yellow fritz for the back. And one thing I like to do, so you can see that there's quite a lot of hook left. So when you come down to sort of, again, where the barb would be, and that's quite important because I'm going to do open turns on this fritz, because this blob's only going to have about 4 turns of fritz on it. So I don't know if the camera's picking it up properly, but you can see if that shows up, there's there's about a 1 to 2mm gap in between the fritz turns, and that's for a deliberate reason. And that's because I don't want this fly to be too bulky. I want it to be small, but I also want it to be sparse. Now, you see videos out there of tying very, very tightly wrapped, big, bushy blobs. Now, they work for a fresh stocky or fish that haven't seen a fly for a long time. They do catch fish and they will always work. But what I found this year is actually, when going for either fish that are seeing a lot of pressure or actually caught a lot of bigger fish on this fly. I don't know if any of you have ever fished farm or reservoir, but I used to live in Oxford, so spent a lot of time there. And this year I've had fish up to 6-7 pounds on blobs, but just like this one, that are really, really small and really, really sparse. And the beauty of tying them sparse with the open turns is it means there's not a huge amount of material. And as you can see, it's not wet, but in the water it would act like this. So the fibers just explode out, whereas a big blob, they kind of stuck in a big bush of colour. Whereas this has lots of movement, it's quite sparse, it pulses in the water, again, looking for the movement of the fly when you're fishing it. And it's just taken so many fish for me. So the front colour. Now, this is where it's slightly different. So I did say earlier that colors don't necessarily make a huge difference. Yellow's yellow, orange is orange, which is true. However, this fritz here is a mixture of orange and pink. Now, when it comes to oranges, obviously there's different shades. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but I think this in particular does. So where you've got this combination of the orange and the pink, when it's wet, the color is completely different. So it's not quite orange, it's not quite pink. It's a lovely blend, and in different lights, different colors will come out. So whereas your standard yellow or your standard orange, in different lights, you're always pretty much going to get the same color. This goes very different in different lights, which I really like. And in case any of you ask, the yellow is just yellow, and this is a two-tone. You can get two-tone yellows and two-tone sunbursts. I do use them. I tie the same fly with a two-tone sunburst at the front as well. The reason I don't do two-tone and two-tone is it's a bit too much. So in the different lights, you just get this absolute melee of colors, which it works, but I think it is too much. So with this, it's a standard color back, and then that two-tone at the front is just a really, really nice little pop of difference. And again, you're going to go with those just 2 turns, or by the time I've got to the eye, probably 2.5 turns of fritz there. Now, one thing, I don't know if any of you know a guy called Lee Hooper. He's a very good friend of mine, a complete purist, but actually taught me how to tie the perfect blob. So the best way to tie a blob is wrap your fritz all the way to the eye. So if you can see there's absolutely no space whatsoever at the eye. And that's really important, because I think for me with blobs, I don't want my blobs to have a head. I know that sounds ridiculous. It's probably quite OCD, but I think they look smarter without it. I don't think it adds. I don't think it subtracts. I just think it looks better. So what we're going to do here is we've got this quite taut. I lift my thread up to 90 degrees from the hook shank, and then I'm just going to pull my fritz at a 180-degree angle to the hook. Okay, so thread up, fritz out. Now, the reason you pull the thread up first is that then the fritz wants to come this way to unwind, but the thread being here has locked it, so it can't go anywhere. So that's secure. And then if you do it in one smooth movement, it releases it from being too close to the eye, and also locks it in nice and tight for you. All you need is a couple of turns. That's it. That's line locked in. Moisten your fingers and drag all those fibers back. And you can see there, you've got, if he wants to play ball, not catch him, a little bit more moisture. There you go. A lovely, neat head area. Or sorry, neat eye area with no head. Okay. And then just whip finish. And you've got a very, very nice, tidy, headless blob, or fab in this case. And then just snip. So if I moisten that a little bit more, you can see how it holds its normal, as you know, standard blob shape. But then if you pull it out, as it would be in the water, you can see how much space you've got in between the fibers. So it's literally 4 turns of fritz on that. So to give you some perspective, if I was going to tie that full length all the way to the back, touching turns, you probably have 10, maybe 12 turns of fritz. So 3 times the amount of fritz compared to this one. And you'd have absolutely no movement. It'd be quite a bulky and unattractive fly. Whereas this being super sparse, it means that it's going to sit really nicely in the water. It's going to have lots of movement for you, and it's going to pick up more fish. But yeah, again, super simple, but takes a lot of fish. So I did promise things would get better, and they are. So we're going to switch it up a little bit now. When I go on Saturday, I'm going to have 2 rods set up. So I'm going to have one rod, which is going to have a fast glass and probably that big nasty pink lure, and the other rod's going to have a midge tip. And even though it's winter, fish will still happily take nymphs. And one of my favorite things to fish in the winter. Fish, obviously, they're hungry. There's not a huge amount of food about. So they will take the natural offerings. And again, when fish have seen a lot of pressure, natural food, or sorry, natural flies will often outcompete your big, nasty, garish lures when fish have seen it all. So I do fish a variety of different things, but one of my favorites is actually cormorants. They're like a nice in between for nymphs and lures. Sort of like a nice go between, and I really like to fish them on a washing line. So my midge tip will have the fab on the point, and then one or two cormorants up the cast. So the hook I've got is size 12, and I've got some chartreuse UTC 70. So it's going to catch that in there, snip off the waist, and then I've got some small silver wire. It's going to catch that in like so. And then just some standard black dyed peacock herl. Now, what I do with my peacock herl is quite a good little tip or trick I picked up a while ago. You've got the base down here, and obviously it's a thicker and stronger stem at the base, but the fibers are much longer. So you want to be tying in at the tip, but obviously the tip is quite weak and tends to be quite brittle. So what I do is I hold the base, and not too firmly, but firm enough, just run. Okay, ironically, the tip of the base is broken there, but what will happen is, there you go, tip breaks off. Now, if you're mid wrapping the fly, and you, for example, you put super glue down, it's all going to unravel. You're going to have a bit of a paddy, and you get really annoyed at it. So a little tip there, just pull it nice and firm until the tip breaks off at the brittle point. And then now, he says, he hopes, you should have a fairly strong piece of peacock herl that shouldn't, being an operative word, shouldn't break when I wrap it up. So we're going to tie it down again to that kind of where a barb would be. And then wrap, touching turns back up towards the eye. Now what we're going to do here is going to wrap up like so, in touching turns all the way down to about a mil and a half behind the eye. And then we're going to do the same trick as we did with the fritz. So the herl at 90 degrees, switch it round with a thread and lock it off. 2 turns behind, 1 turn in front. I would normally snap it and break it, but I'm doing a video and I know what's going to happen is I'm going to snap it and it's going to undo itself. So for this case, I'm going to use my scissors, but generally speaking, you can just break it off. So with your wires, as most of you will be aware, wrap your wires, tinsels, any rib the opposite way to a brittle body material. If it's dubbing, anything like that, doesn't matter, doesn't make a difference. Things like pheasant tail, peacock, ostrich, anything along those lines, wrap the opposite way. Just makes your body a whole lot stronger. Like so. And then again, cross that over. Like so.
I take it, Ben, that's the 70 denier, not the 140.
It is, yeah. Yeah. 140, the head already about this big.
True.
So with bodies with weaker materials or with tinsel ribs or wire ribs, what I like to do is I'm going to put a wing in. Now, what I'm going to do to put the wing is I'm going to do a loop turn. And what that means, I'm going to lift it up and do it. It's going to be loose. And what will happen is, if it's loose, the previous thread wraps will unwrap, the wire will go, body will go. So it's going to do a single half hitch. And what that means is I can do whatever I like with the thread, the body's secure, the wire's secure. Okay, pinch and loop, sorry, that's what I was looking for. So the wing, just normal black marabou, nothing special. You don't want a huge amount, so I'm going to go for around about, maybe on a size 12, a centimetre and a little bit. Okay, so not loads, but enough that you've got a bit of a profile. Again, where before with the cat, I just snip the end off and then use this. What you find with marabou, obviously, is the lower you are, you've got these really long fibres. I don't want that. You can have that, doesn't really make a massive difference. But to me, I want this area here around the head to be nice and small, because I'm going to add cheeks to the fly and I'm going to add a hot head to the fly. I don't want it to be too bulky. This adds a lot of bulk. So what I'm going to do is, the ends are all different lengths. So I'm going to pick a point where it's not too broad and then just break with my nail. Now, what that means is I've got my wing length. Another reason why I do this on cormorants is they have a nasty habit when you go to break the wing after you've made the fly, that the wing pulls out. Okay, so by doing this, you negate that and you just tie it in at the length you want it. So I want it a little bit longer than the bend of the hook. So I'm going to pinch it there and I'm going to snip the tie-in point. And now is when I'm going to pinch all of that fluff out. And what you might find here is that some of the fibres get pulled a little bit further out than the others. The camera's going to pick that up, but I mean it's minuscule amount, not even a millimetre. But if you look at the amount of space I'm working with, that will then cloak the eye. So all I'm going to do is just snip those straight again. And again, that, so are you all aware of pinch and loop? Anyone not aware of pinch and loop? Want me to do it slower for you? I'll take your silences, you know what you're doing. So pinch and loop, up, pinch between your thumb and your finger, and gently bring down. So as I say, the reason I said earlier to do a half hitch, because you've got that loop of slack. If I did that without doing the half hitch, body undoes itself and it all falls apart. Okay. So each, do 2 or 3 turns, and then each turn after that, you're just going to pull down, not too hard, just enough after each turn, just to lock it down a little bit more. Now, obviously, you can't pull crazy hard because your thread will break, but just enough to secure it down, like so. You've got a nice wing in place. Now, cheeks, you don't need to add them. I quite like them. Just a bit of jungle cock. You can use goose bites, you can use glow bright floss, you can use neon vinyl, whatever you want. I've used it all works. In this case, I've got a jungle cock, so I quite like it. So with jungle cock, what I like to do to save a bit of money is I'll never use a single eye on a per. So I never use 2 eyes per fly. I'll always cut an eye in half, or in bigger eyes, I cut them into 4 or even 6 pieces. Okay, so I really do get my money's worth out of the capes. I'll quickly tie my side in and I'll talk you through how I prepare it for the other side. Just gonna lock that into place. So what I like to do, so this one is a case, I've cut it in half because it's a small one. And you'll see you've got the fibres that come off. You can chop these off, you can leave them, whatever you want to do. You've got your main sort of beigey white eye, and then you've got the black. Now, if I wasn't going to put a glow bright hothead on this fly, what I would do is I'd tie on the white. The reason being is the black will show through the thread. However, in this case, because I'm putting a hothead on top of this, it's thicker than the thread, the black won't show through, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm going to line it up to around about where I want it to be, like so. And then I'm going to, when I'm happy, snip and then tie those in like so. Now, you don't need too many turns. Reason being is, as I say, I'm going to put a hot head on this, so I don't want to make it too bulky. So in this case, a single whip finish again is more than enough. And then I'm going to come in with Glow-Brite number 12. Okay. Just going to catch that on there. Like so. Now, what you can do is you can whip finish freely with just the Glow-Brite without tying it in. I would normally do that, but it's a bit hit and miss, and I don't fancy doing it well, as I say, on a demonstration. So if the head's a little bit bigger than I'd normally have it, but you've got a nice green hotspot there that's going to attract the fish. So a relatively natural fly with a little pop of colour, and that's a really nice little touch. So I do this with green head, I do it with an orange head, and a red head. It's a very, very simple fly to tie, but in those three little variations, it's pretty much all I fish. But for the winter periods, I really, really like this black and green one. Again, black and green being your classic small water colour combination. Later on in this demonstration, you'll see a little bit more black and green. But this is one of my favourites. This is one of the flies I'll be fishing on the washing line with the fab. So you can see, bring the fish in with this one, and then natural, a little pop of colour, and then either take one or the other. So that's that one. Now, next one, it's another cormorant, and this is the other one that's going to be on the cast of the washing line. So again, we're going back to a size 12. And I was so prepared that I forgot the thread for it. Luckily, it's just here. So this one again is simple, simple as you like, but natural with a pop of colour. Okay, so this is one of my favourite patterns for reservoirs and small waters. It's caught me umpteen amounts of fish, and it's a really, really good pattern. It's a rib combination that I use on a lot of flies, and I'll talk you through that when I show you. It'll be easier to show you. So size 12 again, and we're going to go with a red thread. Doesn't particularly matter. I prefer to use a UTC 70 because it's a little bit stronger. This is 8.0, but I don't have any, unfortunately. So we're going to go with this. So in the event that when I'm tying in the wing, the thread breaks, bear with me. You might see a grown man cry. So little base of thread. And I'm going to go with some small red wire this time. So same size as a silver, but in this case red. Now, this pattern, I have tied it with silver instead of red. It works. It doesn't work as well. I mentioned earlier that fish aren't that smart, but for some reason, they can pick out the colours of red wire over silver instead of orange or orange fritz. Second rib is a medium pearl. Now, you could use Mirage, you can use Pearl, you can use Iris, Ice Blue. They all kind of do fairly similar things. For me, I think Mirage is a little bit strong. It's very, very bright. I don't know if I do have one to hand, actually. I'll show you the difference. So you've got the one I've got here, which is kind of your standard Pearl, and then you've got Mirage. I don't know if it's going to pick that up very clearly, but the standard Pearl is more translucent, whereas Mirage is just a solid, very, very bright pearl flash. It does work absolutely fine. I prefer, as I say, a slightly subtler one because I want these flies to have a little bit of colour, a little bit of flash, but not too much. Again, we're looking to fish for pressured fish with flies like these. So if you have a very, very bright Mirage, you run the risk of putting fish off. Again, same as before, break off at the weak point, and then we're just going to tie in like so, and tie it up the hook. A little bit of thread that's, there we go. So, same again as before, touching turns. And the rib on this, I'm going to do slightly differently. I'll show you why in a second. So again, about a mil and a half from the eye. Do that crossover. Being brave, I'm going to lock it. There we go. Right. Now, I'm going to half hitch here. There's a good reason for that, because with the pearl tinsel, it's quite slippy, and it sometimes has a tendency to slip or knock the body. So if you just half hitch, just holds everything in place. With the wire before, I came the opposite way. Now, when you're doing double ribs, the wire is the strongest ribbing material. So you want to do that the opposite way to the two weakest materials. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to wrap the pearl tinsel the same way as the peacock hull, like so. Just going to bring that up slightly. And then the wire, because the wire is the strongest material, I'm going to wrap that the opposite way, or counterclockwise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it specifically over the pearl tinsel. So what that means is the pearl tinsel is going to be locking down the peacock, and the wire is then locking down the pearl. So the peacock's got double protection, and the pearl has got very, very strong protection as well from the wire. And again, little half edge. So you see there, you've got a really nice, almost multicolored body. Now, I mentioned earlier that I use this rib combination for a few different flies. It's really nice on a dialback. So either black or brown tails, doesn't matter hugely. Works very well. Also works really, really well on shrimp patterns. So if any of you fish places like Grafton and Rutland, hare's ear body, scruffy hare's ear or similar tail, and then this pearl and red wire cross rib for the rib of the body, and then just brush some hare's ear over the top of that, and it works really, really well. So it's quite a nice versatile combination. Again, back in 1.5 centimeters-ish of black marabou. And we're going to find a nice point again to break that. So measure it up where you want it to be. So again, about the end there. And then it's going to snip all that waste off. And a very neat snip. There we go. That's better. So it can be a little bit fiddly doing it this way, but it does mean you're much less likely to rip your wing out, because sometimes you can imagine, well, for two reasons. When you tie at the base of the feather or the stem, you get the thicker elements or the thicker fibers. That's going to make your head really big and bulky. Okay. What it also means is that you've got less pressure and strength on the stems of the feathers or the stems of the feather fibers. It's therefore got less purchase on the hook, more likely to get pulled out. And again, also bulks up that head area. So there's a couple of reasons behind my madness. Right, again, because we've half hitched, I haven't got to worry about doing anything. It's all good. So we're going to pinch and loop, and then we're going to lock that down. Now in this case, the red is the head color. So I'm just going to tie around until I create a nice round head. Put it towards me. There we go. Again, not too big, but just a nice head shape.
Touch the vice to refocus it, Ben. Yep.
Got it. There we go. And again, super simple. Little touch of red, little touch of pearl, but it just seems to take fish. I think again, it's not really particularly in your face. Oh, drop super glue. Quite subtle, but just catches fish. Now I'm just going to see if it's running out. There we go. Now, one thing you must do with cormorants, smother the head in super glue, because that super glue will seep all the way in through the thread layers down to that where that marabou is tied in, and just give it an extra layer of security. And the best eye cleaning tool there is the peacock herl that's snapped off. So you're not going to use it for anything else other than cleaning the eye out. And the little fibres are perfect for taking all of that super glue. So yeah, another really nice, super simple little pattern that I'll be using at the weekend. Next one. Going back to the black and green theme, I think this is potentially a fly that a lot of people have forgotten about over the years. It's certainly one I forgot about for many moons. Those that fish reservoirs will be very aware of this pattern. Actually, probably small still waters as well, but in much larger sizes. Where has my black thread gone? There. So it's the Pitsford Pea. Probably the simplest fly you'll ever tie, and one that I didn't fish for years until I got absolutely spanked by a bloke using one in a competition, and I was very annoyed about it because I was doing really well until that point. It's not your standard one, so the original was very big, probably a size 8, loads of marabou in the tail. Still works this day, but one of those sort of forgotten classics. This one's slightly different in the sense it's small. So if any of you fish lock style competitions, this pattern I describe as international rules. So it's a certain length to fit into a size gauge, and it can be used in sort of home nations or international competitions, which I used to fish quite a lot. So hook and a vise, a size 10 wet fly hook, okay? And then for the tail, we're just going to go with, again, black marabou. Because there's a tail on a larger fly, I'm not hugely worried about the slightly bigger base. So just going to pull it out and tie it in like so. And then touching turns all the way down to about where a barb would be. And again, underneath everything, lift it up, put it taut, and you can see how it's just going to lock in nicely. Now, I'm not going to fish in an international rules comp, so I'm going to go vaguely what it would be. So it'd be around about there, I expect, maybe slightly shorter. But as you can see, it's very small. It's nothing kind of crazy. Micro swage chenille, pretty standard stuff, really nice stuff. And with this, what I tend to do, if it's going to work for me, is it has a core. Now, the best way to access the core, if it's going to play ball, is with scissors, and you can just pull, but it's not playing ball, and I don't want to break it. So
I use some wire strippers, Ben.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those, so I use my thumb and my nails. But yeah, wire strippers, perfect, because then you're not going to break that core. I used to have a pair of scissors that had an indent. It was I think it was a wire cutting indent, same concept as your wire strippers, and that was really good. But unfortunately, I had to retire those. So yeah, strip down to the core, so it's nice and easy and small to tie in. If you don't do that, you get quite a bulky body, which you don't want. You want quite a slim profile. Now, one thing you might notice, if it's going to pick up, that'll be easier for you. You see I've got about 2 to 3 mil. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 3 mil of bare stripped core. Okay, that's really important. So when I start to tie it in, if I immediately started with the thicker black, what would happen is you'd get a bulge, but it wouldn't marry up on the other side, and then it wouldn't sit right as a body. So the very, very back would have a bump, and then it would slim down. By stripping down to the core and having a little bit of excess there, you can see there that first turn is going to be just core to get around to the other side, and then your first proper turn will be your chenille. And what that means is you just get a nice, neat and tidy body that stays the same length all the way through. So you see what I mean here? Immediately you've got a nice slim profile. So touching turns with this, you can be pretty firm with it, tight, nice and tight. Then we're just going to catch it off like so. And then snip it, snip the waist. Then I'm going to come in with some chartreuse. Okay, same stuff again, just a different color. And then just strip it down to the core, like so. And then catch that one in there. Now you're going to want 2 to 3 turns of this at the head. So not a huge amount, but just enough to get that colour. And come in and just catch him in. Sometimes with these, a little trick is to just work with gravity on this one. And if you angle your hook up sort of 45 degrees or so, it stops your thread from slipping off the hook. Right, just whack there for a second. Out of the way. There we go. Now, if I left that hook at a normal angle, that thread's going to slip straight off the eye because I'm so close to it. But by angling your hook up, you can just tie it off without it all slipping and falling apart. A couple of turns to whip finish, and probably the simplest fly I'll ever tie. But for a forgotten classic, it definitely needs to go a good comeback because it's caught so many fish for me since I saw it in that competition. Simple as you like. Looks like nothing, but fish just go nuts for it. So
Well,
again,
it's got the same color combination as the Montana, isn't it?
yeah, it's a Montana without a hackle, pretty much. And obviously the thorax cover, but it's one of those ones. It's nothing new. I think, to be fair, nowadays in fishing, nothing is new with fly tying. Everyone's done it before or doing a new version of the same thing. But it's just going back to that classic black and green color combination. But you know, deconstruct it, make it simpler. Montana's a great fly, but you don't need the hackle. You don't need the thorax. Well, okay, you've got a marabou tail rather than cock hackle, but it's the same concept. It just catches fish. So, am I all right for time? I've got one fly left.
Plenty of time.
Cool. So the last fly is one that came onto the scene for me 3 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I don't know if any of you have heard of the black mamba. Really, really good small stillwater fly. It's caught me umpteen fish, big fish. Works really well for stalking. This is a mini mamba. So black mamba's great, catches a stack of fish, but it's very big, very heavy. It's got a 4 mil tungsten bead plus lead or tungsten wire, whatever you plunder it. It's designed for stalking, but obviously catch a lot of fish. But chucking that around all day breaks your arm. So I designed the mini mamba. It's pretty much the same thing, but just a little bit smaller. So the hook and the vise is a size 10 rather than the original 6. And I've got a 3 mil slotted tungsten bead. Now, if any of you fish rivers, you'll know slotted beads, although they're favoured on rivers with the jig hooks, they actually weigh less per millimetre than your classic countersunk beads. So if I'm tying a classic black mamba, I like a big countersunk bead because ratio of weight to millimetre is more, but with a smaller one, I want slightly less, so it's less. So I've then got some green crystal flash, 4, 5, 6 strands, doesn't really matter, just enough that you're going to get a little bit of colour out of it. Fish aren't going to count, so enough that you've got a bit of flash, but nothing kind of crazy. Okay, so that's quite a nice amount. Then a detail that makes zero difference whatsoever, but I had it and I wanted to use it up, and it looks quite cool. Got some chartreuse wire. Again, so a black and green color combination to this fly. The wire color on the original was silver. The chartreuse makes no difference. As I say, I had it in the box and it looks quite nice, but it doesn't really affect how the fly fishes. So, as with any bead, the wire goes in the back of it. It means your whole body stays nice and neat and tidy, and also there's a place for that wire snub end to go. With the slot beads, even easier, and it actually fills that gap really nicely. So it's going to wrap up, and then we're going to come back down again and tie this off like so. So again, as all the flies, around about where a barb would be. Okay. Zonk strips, black zonker. So I've tried this fly in both big and mini, in black, pink, olive, white. Nothing seems to really work as well as the black. I did think cat's whiskey, your black and green, would work as well, if not better. It doesn't. I don't know why. If you do fish it and you have more success, let me know. I'd love to see it, because I don't know why. They just don't want it, which really sort of boggles the mind. But yeah, so I'll stick with the classic. In terms of length, so when I tie anything with zonker, I tend to go 3 or 4 mil over the front of the hook. The reason being is when I put a body on this, when I tie it in, every time you do something that changes the width here, or what you're measuring it up against, it's going to change. So if I put a thicker body, I'm going to lose a couple of mil because I'm going to come over it. So always over estimate what you think you're going to need. Okay. And then around about, let's say 2.5 cents, so an inch off the back, like so. So not a huge amount. And obviously you can shorten this down as well. Now, you can leave it squared off. I don't like that. I tend to, with a lot of people as well, just put a little notch in it. Okay, so it's going to take one corner and the other corner. Okay, and then just turn it to a point. Does it make a difference? Probably not. Do I have any idea? Have I tested it out? No. But it's just something I like to do. I think it looks a little bit tidier, and it's become a habit when tying zonker flies. So line it up to around about, again, 3, 4, maybe 5 mil over what I think. Moisten your fingers and then pull it all forwards. So you want to create a nice little gap for your thread to catch in on. You can absolutely leave it and just tie it in. You don't have to create that little gap in there. But what you'll find is you get quite a bulky tying point. And again, similar to the marabou earlier that I mentioned, if you don't strip it down to the core, you lose that grip of when you tie it in. So it becomes loose, it tends to slip, and also it then creates a weird shape. You don't get that nice natural taper that you achieve with the rabbit. You get sort of a taper, then a notch or a gap or an error. So a small detail, but does make a difference. So tie that in nice and tight. I'm aware that my vice just dropped. Can you still see that clearly?
Yeah.
Let me bring that back there for you. Is that better?
Yeah.
Perfect. So tie nice and tight, and a couple of turns in front. So body, same as the original. Ice dub in black, peacock black. Anything similar if you fish rivers, hens 46, exactly the same. Just that kind of classic peacock kind of color. Okay. Again, does it matter hugely? Probably not, but I quite like to kind of keep this one fairly close to the original. So one thing I will do is, if you look at my dubbing needle, I've got a very, very thin start. The reason for that is I'm going to wrap that over where I just tied it in. Now, I do this for two reasons. One, it tidies it up. So you notice you haven't got a thread gap anymore. It ties it up, looks smarter, but also it's more secure. So if I left that as thread, you imagine the fish takes, it's hooked, its teeth are literally going to be perfectly catching that little notch of thread. And every fish you get is going to nick, and it's going to shred that bit of thread. And a fly that is actually pretty robust, that should last a very long time, won't. Okay, so just 1 to 2 turns really sparse of that dubbing, just bless you, just locks that in and stops anything from getting nicked on it, and makes it a little bit more secure for you, so you can get a few more fish on the fly. Body wise, just wrap a nice width body. Doesn't have to be huge, but just enough that you get a nice shape. Okay, because realistically your main body is going to be this rabbit, but a nice flat base, nice bit of color is always good. If you notice, I've stopped about 1 millimeter behind the bead. Reason being is I need somewhere when I tie in this rabbit to get that presence. Okay, so the bead gives you a nice natural curvature drop. You want the body to do the same. There's a nice notch in there for that rabbit to get locked into nice and tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull it all back. Now, slightly differently to earlier, where at the back I pulled all of the rabbit off as much as I could, okay, to then lock it in. Here, there's going to be about 1 mil, maybe 2 mil of extra rabbit. Reason being, if I pull it all off to where it would be, you see how far back that body starts with the different fibers, okay? What this does is give you an extra couple of mil. That body then starts 3 or 4 mil higher up, and it just looks a little bit more natural, and you get a better taper. And also where it's positioned, I've got plenty of grip to lock that in. And also it's going to be where the super glue is, going to be where the collar is, going to be lots of thread turns over this area to lock it in place. Now, when you snip it off, what I like to do with rabbit is, it kind of gave before I was finished explaining, but when you're cutting rabbit, especially around a bead or on a head, don't cut it square. Because if you cut it square, it's going to finish square, and you're going to have 2 points either side that aren't going to want to play ball, and they're not going to want to be tied in, okay? So what I do is do a little notch on one side, and then I notch. You need sharp scissors, to be fair, but little notches, little cuts all the way around in a circle. And as you can see here, it means that it all catches in really nice and neatly. And if you can see there. So I don't have a big notch over here or a big notch over this side, because I've curved it round. So it then follows the natural curvature of the bead or of the body. And that means easy to tie in and needs to tie in. Now, I have neglected to get the collar dubbing out. As you can see, my dubbing collection is a little bit excessive. I'm a massive fan of dubbings, and it's bad. So this one is just a chartreuse pearl, glister, spectra, whatever you want to call it. Again, with that kind of black and green theme. I'm getting ahead of myself. I've still got a rib. I apologize. Rib. So what we're going to do with the rib is we're going to wrap in between the rabbit, pulling it all out of the way if one's playable. There we go. There we go. Right. One locking turn. Now, another important thing with the ribs, you're going to wrap probably 3 to 4 turns, but you don't want to catch any of the rabbit in. So it's a little bit fiddly. The importance is if you catch that rabbit in, you're going to lose a natural movement of the fly. Okay. So by just separating it each turn, you maintain the natural movement of the fly. You're not catching any unwanted rabbit. It's going to be a little bit fiddly. If you moisten your fingers a little bit easier. Like so. There we go. And then it's going to lock it in really nicely, and you get a nice. So, as I say, you don't need the chartreuse wire. I think it looks really cool. And it looks nicer than the silver with the black and green. Doesn't make a difference. But it looks good. And as you can see, you've still got that lovely natural movement of the rabbit because you haven't caught any fibers in. Okay, so it's a little bit fiddly, but just makes your life a little bit easier. So if we forget that ever happened, and I, of course, had already done the rib by the time I got to the collar. The collar is a yellow chartreuse spectra pearl sparkle dubbing. Doesn't matter which. You can get technical with it. So for me, I love my dubbings. I get quite into them and into their thicknesses, their movement, their material. This is quite a thin, sparse spectra. Okay. Now, I like this on this particular pattern, or patterns like this with beads, with the Zonka, because I haven't got a huge amount of space to work with. Now, if I was fishing the original, the big one, which is about yay long, I'd use a bigger spectra because I've got a lot more space, and I'm not really worried about, bulking this area up because I've got more to work with. Because I've got a very small area to work with, a sparser, finer dubbing is better because I can get more in to create more color without adding too much bulk. Okay, and that's just me being OCD over dubbings. It doesn't matter, but if you wanted to get into the nuances of dubbing, I am your man. So a couple of turns, okay, and I'm going to strip it down. Now I'm then going to do one locking turn. And the reason for that is this first couple of turns are going to be my cloaking turns. Now, what that means is, obviously, as you'll all know, when you catch a few fish on a fly, they get quite scruffy and they fish better when they're scruffy. Okay. I'm going to skip a few steps and sort of jump that process of fish eating it and pulling those fibers out. So what I'm going to do is just a few scruffs like this, and you can see we're starting to pull those fibers out of that collar. Okay. Now, this fly will immediately fish better than if we just had a simple collar, because you've got that nice marriage between the green and the black. That dubbing is going to run through the rabbit and it looks really nice and natural. What you'll also see is I've now, all of that thread that I tied it in with is now visible. Now it's a black bead, it doesn't matter, but I want to tidy that up, okay? So a little bit more dubbing. Now we've covered that initial area. Just going to thin that down a little bit, there we go. Okay. Clean all that. And then we're going to whip finish. Like so. So I do exactly the same concept with all of my river nymphs, with any sort of scruffy nymph where eventually a few fish is going to take it and that collar dubbing is going to pull out. I'll do it when I tie it. I think it looks more natural, it looks buggier, and I really do genuinely think it fishes better quicker, and you will catch more fish. Now, with the tail, okay, I don't want the flash to be the same length as the rabbit. The reason being is they're two very different materials and they have two very different means of movement. Rabbit is very natural, it's very soft, it will move really well in the water. Crystal flash is effectively plastic. It does have movement, but it's not as natural and it's not as free as the rabbit. So by having them at the same length, you're going to have two materials moving in completely different planes. It's just not going to look natural to the fish, not going to look realistic. What I like to do is, you see where I've cut the point earlier of the rabbit, I'm going to take my crystal flash and I'm going to cut it to the same length as the point. The reason being, one, it's a really good length because it provides a little bit of flash, not too much. Reason number two, it has a very, very similar movement property to the natural skin of the rabbit. So that skin of the rabbit is going to be your, I suppose, firmest point of the strip. And what that means is your fibers are going to move really well and really freely, but that skin piece won't. So if you cut the green crystal flash to the same length as a strip, it means they've got the same movement property. So they're going to move exactly the same as each other. And then it provides the freedom for the fibers of the rabbit to then do its own thing. So it looks very natural and neat. So for a lure, there's quite a lot of thought process behind how it's tied. But yeah, that is the mini mamba. And that is the last fly, I'm afraid. Yeah, thank you very much. I will spin the camera around so you can see my face. We didn't do it earlier because the focus kept dropping in and out. So I thought I'd do my best so you could see the fly as best you could and then show my ugly mug. But yeah, thank you very much. I hope that was vaguely insightful and helpful. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I will see you in a second.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Have a nice Christmas, mate.
Cheers.
That was good fun. Thank you.